Hi everyone. So we had a break from building this web console for Elixir and Phoenix because I've been busy with other stuff, but let's get back to it because it was fun. I think we left it off with our Backdoor, which is the name of the project, being able to do several things. Let's just wait for this thing to start. I think that's the wrong mix dev. That's the script I had here to make this work. Okay, so what it does so far is able to start multiple independent sessions. And I think the last time we made it so that it understands input, actually output, capturing output. Hello. And yes, sure, it's printed here. So it's actually also printed on the actual console, which is fine. So the next thing I said we were going to do was to make it aware of the logger and log messages, so that if we require the logger, so we can use it, and we use logger info, that will output it here into the web console, which currently it doesn't, right? So currently it displays it here. In addition to that, we could also display it in more structured manner, which we'll do in the future. But for today, we will just focus on making this thing like send this data, that these log messages to the web console. And I think there's several ways of doing that. I'm not entirely sure which one is better. But if we like using Airline libraries and we have some, we want to capture messages that are being sent from Airline as well to the logger, the way to go, I think, is to actually hook into Airline Clogger. And there are ways to do that. Airline Clogger, Google, I agree to sell my soul. Okay, here we go. Airline Clogger, and it has a way to provide handlers. So we can add handler this way to Airline. There's a unique handler ID, and then module that will have a function that has to be like 2 parameters function. It says like log event, I think, something like that. We'll get there. And config parameter that I think we're not gonna use. So the way to hook into Airline Clogger, that's the previous attempt. The way to hook into Airline Clogger is to actually look into application callback module. There's application, and we can add this logger here. Oops, I have it messed up. Okay, now it's good. Right, so we can do that logger and add handler. Okay, that's give us nice documentation. Handler ID, for example, we can have backdoor logger handler. That's just a name. However, name it is going to be good. It just has to be unique, I believe. And then the module that is going to accept those events. Backdoor, let's call it logger handler. And we don't really have any configuration yet. We might passing like formatter here and some options later on. But today we're just focusing on getting that info collected and displayed in some form. So that's going to be these. And let's see whether that it probably shouldn't start. It's going to crash when starting. No, it started. That's interesting. My code does does work. I have no idea why. But I have it. Sorry, I have it open already. But because it's executed on runtime, right? So it just adds handler and the name, and then this is the module name and options. But it actually has to wait for this for log events to be sent to it. All right, let's create this module. Something like that. Logger handler, and the function that it expects us to define here, logger, is just the function log with two parameters. One is being the log message, and the other one is the config that we are going to ignore. And for now, I'm just going to print to the console what we are receiving, right? So let's start it again. We can actually see the logger has been added, registered, and it prints those log messages in like IO inspect. So it's a map, right? So with different things inside. So we're just capturing those. And for now, we're just displaying them to the console. What we want to do is to capture them and display them in the session here, provided that provided that the log message originated from this particular session, so that if we have like 2 or 3 sessions open and we produce some log messages from session number 1, they will only be displayed in the session number 1, not in session number 2. And the same way, if we're going to log some messages from some other place, from other code, it shouldn't be, just displaying everywhere, right? So my idea to solve that issue is to actually do it with the help of the logger metadata, which we can see here. That's a big log message, but basically each log message has this meta field in it, where Erlang or Elixir, Erlang as well these days has this concept of metadata, and they are unified. So if on Elixir level we're going to add some metadata, it will be passed down to Airline Clogger handler and can be found here. So there are a few ways to do that. Actually, we could probably even just use this process ID that we have here to find, because it's going to be associated with the session, I think. So this is session number 1. It will have some process ID and session number 2, etc. But this will, well, this could also work. But I think the simpler way to do that is just to add the metadata explicitly, which session ID this log message is coming from. That will save us some time on figuring out if this process is associated with backdoor session, and that is being done on every single log message. So in a greater scale of things, that will save us some CPU cycles. All right, so how do we do that? I think we have to have this module called code runner. I haven't looked into this code for like a few months, but right, this is the code runner that we've written before to execute code. So it takes those strings and evaluates them and executes them. What we can do is hook somewhere here in the init callback and just add this session ID to the logger metadata. So what I can do is logger metadata, and it takes keyword list. I can give a key value things that are being added there. So backdoor session ID, for example, that should be pretty unique. And we have that in session ID, right? and that I will just restart the server. I think if we do that, I'm just gonna reload it, start a new session, and if I'm going to that reloads because the assets compile, require logger info foo, and that actually printed it here because in the handler itself, I think I'm printing this out, but that's not like, well, that would be like the simplest thing that could possibly work, right? So we just print it out with IO inspect, but I'm actually don't want to do that this way. I want it to be a bit more sophisticated so that we can, you know, understand the structure of the log messages and expand them and, you know, click through them later on. So let's try it one time. Logger info foo. Yeah, that doesn't print it here. It prints it over here. Yeah, actually, the other thing was good because it allowed me to see what's in the log message. Do I have to reload the thing? I think I have to. It won't. Right, so I have to reload it one more time. Require logger info foo. Here we go. So what we have here or here is basically, yep, we got it. We got meta, and then backdoor session ID is the session number. Let's try another session. And this is the other log message, and this is, yeah, session ID 2. So that works as expected. Some other log messages are being here from endpoint, and they shouldn't actually have it. So we can filter them out by not having that backdoor session ID. So we're not interested in those. Okay. That means we can just match here in the function and you know, capture what we're interested in and, you know, do something with it. And then provide catch-all that doesn't do anything otherwise. Okay. Do I have to return something from this handler function? That's an interesting question. Does it expect me to like return OK or whatever? Module log config void. So I think it's must log the return values function is ignored by the logger. Okay, but I will just return OK from both because I like it. Okay, so we're capturing the session ID. Now, what we can do here is, I think we have something that's called helpers, no, log session, maybe log helpers here. Cool. So I have this module where I give it session ID and the value. Here we go. Let's try that. So we have this thing, and let's for now just log session ID value. So that will send our log in structured form. So just this, you know, nested map of things to our session ID. It complains that there's no value because it's actually log because there's no value, like that. I think. Yeah. So that will somehow work. I think it's going to crash, but let's make it crash. Okay, let's start the session. Session number 1. Cool. So it crashed because like it tried to display that log message and format it, which is precisely what we want to do, right? So we can format this log message ourselves here, which I'm not going to do today. So basically there's this backdoor live, which is our main live view, I think. And it has this format log statement function that already understands input, output, and result from executing commands. What it doesn't understand is the log statements, like the logger log statements, or basically anything else. We can just provide it with catch all for now, which is basically these. Let's get rid of that. Okay. All right. And one more time. Let's start fresh. Because I think we already did it and we saw it works, but let's try again. Cool. Yeah, so we can see that we have two different handlers. One handler is outputting this to the standard output. So this is the console backend, the Elixir console backend. The other handler we added on the Airline level, and we capture the log, and we displayed for now just IO inspect here. Actually, it's inspect on the our backdoor web console, which is fine for now. So what I want to do, like in the long run with this thing, is to display it in the text format, but also have it like you click on it, it expands so we can see all the metadata, etc. Something things we can't do in or we can't easily do on the terminal, but we can in the web app. So that's going to be like one of the next steps. But for now, I think we made it. So we're capturing the logs, we're capturing input, output. There's a few more tests which we can run. So we can start another session and use logger from here. And this should only be logged to session number 2. And we can see it's not being logged to the console. It's being logged to session number 2. It's not being logged to session number 1. And likewise from here, this should only appear here, but not in our sessions, not in session 1, not in session 2. And the other thing which we can test is just, start those multiple sessions in multiple windows, because that thing has to be like interactive as well between multiple users. I wanted them to be able to share the session and work on something together, because people are like that. So Fubarbas, here we go, live view. I think that's enough for today. Thank you for watching and see you next time.